Imagine this: a world gripped by crisis, famine, war, disease, divisions so deep that nations forget they share the same sky. Borders tighten, languages clash, flags are waved like weapons. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching us from, and please like this video to support the channel. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. In a small lab tucked away in France, a man peers into his microscope, not to conquer, but to understand. He's not looking for glory, not fame, not even gold. He's looking for truth. And when he finds it, he won't keep it to himself. He won't patent it. He won't hide it behind a wall or fence. He'll share it with the world. Because Louis Pasteur believed something radical: science knows no country. In just 5 words, he shattered the illusion that knowledge should ever be locked behind borders, that wisdom should wear a uniform. Pasteur believed knowledge belongs to everyone, that a cure discovered in France could save a life in India, that an idea sparked in Egypt could ignite minds in Brazil. And when you think about it, he was right. The stars don't shine differently over Canada than they do over Kenya. Gravity doesn't discriminate between a king or a farmer. In DNA, the code of life is written in the same 4 letters, whether you're born in Tokyo or Timbuktu. So what is science really? And why did this humble Frenchman insist it was borderless, boundless, and universal? Let's find out. This is the story of a torch. A flame passed through time, not from empire to empire but from mind to mind. A torch that burns not for power but for progress. A torch that illuminates the world. There's a famous quote that once said, "Science knows no country." It was spoken by Louis Pasteur, the man who helped defeat invisible enemies, bacteria, viruses, and ignorance, with nothing but a microscope, a chalkboard, and an unshakable belief in human progress. But what did he mean? What does it truly mean that science knows no country? In a world that draws lines across deserts and oceans, between mountains and hearts, this idea feels almost rebellious. Countries have borders, armies, flags, passports, but science, real science, crosses them all. The law of gravity doesn't change when you cross a national border. A vaccine developed in one nation saves lives in another. And the stars we map from Paris are the same stars seen from Nairobi, Santiago, or Seoul. Louis Pasteur didn't just make discoveries. He lit a torch made of knowledge, and instead of guarding it, he passed it on. Because to Pasteur and to the generations of scientists who followed him, science was never meant to be a possession. It was a gift from nature, to be unwrapped by curiosity. A gift from one generation to enlighten the next. Science knows no country, because knowledge belongs to humanity and is the torch which illuminates the world. This wasn't just poetry, it was a principle. And to understand the depth of those words, we must travel across time, across continents, across disciplines. This is the story of how knowledge unites what politics often divides, of how ideas once set free move faster than any army, of how one man's belief that truth should serve all people, not just his own, helped spark revolutions in health, technology, and human understanding. From the lab benches of 19th century France to the operating rooms of today's hospitals, to the stars we now chase through telescopes and rovers. This is the story of why science knows no country and why it never will. The year is 1822. In a quiet town called Dole in eastern France, a boy is born. His name is Louis Pasteur. He is the son of a tanner, a leather worker, a man who shapes animal hides with care and precision. His father once fought in Napoleon's army and now earns his bread through slow, steady labor. The France Louis is born into is not yet a world of science. It is a world of belief, some of it true, much of it not. People still believe diseases appear from bad smells, from curses, from the wrath of the divine. Doctors operate with unwashed hands. Surgeons perform their work in blood-stained coats. And when a child dies of infection, families grieve, but they do not yet understand why. In those days, death was familiar, a frequent visitor in homes, hospitals, and battlefields. But something is changing. Across Europe, a quiet revolution is brewing, not in politics, but in thought. Enlightenment thinkers are challenging tradition. Natural philosophers are transforming into scientists. Telescopes peer deeper into space. Steam engines roar. Chemistry begins to explain the invisible. And among them, young Louis Pasteur is beginning to ask his own questions. He is not a child genius. He is quiet, methodical, obsessed with drawing and detail. His early passions are not for medicine, but for art and science, the textures of nature, the invisible worlds he senses but cannot yet prove. But it is in that tension between art and science, between the seen and unseen, that his genius begins to stir. Pasteur studies at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. He becomes a chemist, a teacher, a man of the microscope. But more than anything, he becomes a man of questions. Why does wine spoil? Why do wounds fester? Can decay be prevented? Can life be protected from what we cannot see? These questions will take him into cellars, farms, breweries, and battlefields, into universities and operating rooms, and soon they will take him into the heart of what we now call microbiology. But long before he solves any of these mysteries, Louis Pasteur holds one quiet, radical belief: that truth once discovered belongs to all. Not to France, not to kings or patents, but to humanity. And as we follow his journey, we'll begin to see why this belief wasn't just noble, it was revolutionary. Science rarely begins with certainty. More often it starts with rot: spoiled wine, sour milk, infected wounds, dead livestock. Problems that seem ordinary until someone starts asking why. Louis Pasteur, now a professor and chemist, began asking these questions in the most unlikely of places: breweries and wineries. In the mid-1800s, France's wine industry was in crisis. Barrels were spoiling, fermentations failed. Pasteur was asked to investigate, not to cure the world, just to save the wine. What he found changed everything. Beneath the cloudy surface of spoiled wine, he saw tiny living organisms, yeast cells, doing battle with invaders, bacteria. Fermentation, he realized, wasn't a chemical process. It was biological. Tiny, invisible creatures were creating alcohol or ruining it. Life was swarming in places no eye could see. And if that was true for wine, what about the human body? Pasteur had stumbled upon a terrifying and beautiful truth. Microorganisms were everywhere. They caused decay, disease, death. But maybe, just maybe, they could be stopped. This became his obsession and his battle. He challenged the dominant belief of the time, the miasma theory, which claimed disease came from bad air. He insisted it wasn't air but life itself, tiny invaders that made us sick. At first he was laughed at, ridiculed. Doctors resisted washing their hands, surgeons rejected his findings. But Pasteur kept experimenting, demonstrating, proving. He invented a method to kill bacteria in liquids: pasteurization. Today, it keeps our milk, juice, and water safe across the globe. He developed vaccines for anthrax, and most famously, rabies. When a young boy was bitten by a rabid dog and brought to his lab, Pasteur administered his untested vaccine. The boy survived. Pasteur became a hero, not just in France but around the world. Doctors from every nation came to study his methods. Scientists in Germany, England, Russia, and the US adopted his ideas. Germ theory spread faster than disease. It changed how we deliver babies, how we clean wounds, how we treat infections, sterilize tools, build hospitals, and make vaccines. Louis Pasteur had uncovered something that affected all people, regardless of nation, race, or status, and he never claimed it for France alone. His discoveries weren't French breakthroughs, they were human breakthroughs. That's why he said what he did. Science knows no country, because knowledge belongs to humanity. For Pasteur, science was the opposite of war. While nations fought over land and power, science reached across oceans, saving lives on both sides of the battlefield. In a time of nationalism, he chose universalism. In a time of suspicion, he offered understanding. And in a world obsessed with borders, he dedicated his life to truths that crossed them all. When Louis Pasteur died in 1895, the world mourned a hero. But more than that, they inherited his torch. He had shown that disease was not divine punishment, but biology. That health was not a privilege of the rich, but a possibility for all. And that science, when shared, could build bridges, even where history had built walls. His ideas didn't stop at the French border, they crossed continents. In England, a young doctor named Joseph Lister used Pasteur's theories to develop antiseptic surgery, transforming hospitals from houses of death into places of healing. In Germany, Robert Koch used microscopes to isolate deadly bacteria, paving the way for modern bacteriology. And in the United States, a quiet war was being waged, not with weapons, but with needles, against one of the most feared diseases on earth, polio. Children in wheelchairs, families living in fear, pools drained, schools closed. It was Jonas Salk who found a vaccine. And when he did, he followed Pasteur's example. He gave it to the world. When asked who owned the patent, Salk famously replied, "There is no patent. Could you patent the sun?" That wasn't just humility. That was Pasteur's torch, still burning. Science knows no country. And when the 20th century reached for the stars, it brought that flame with it. The space race may have been political, but the science behind it was shared. Engineers in the US used formulas developed by German scientists. Soviet biologists studied genetics pioneered in Britain. And when humanity finally stepped onto the moon, it wasn't just an American footprint. It was ours. One small step for man. One giant leap for humankind. Later came the Human Genome Project, an international effort involving scientists from over 20 countries. Together, they mapped the blueprint of life. Not for profit, not for politics, but to understand what makes us human. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, this spirit returned once again. Scientists around the world shared genetic data online, in real time. Vaccines were developed in record speed, tested in multiple countries, and distributed globally. Mistakes were made, inequities existed. But the principle remained. Knowledge is faster when shared, and science is strongest when it belongs to everyone. That is the legacy of Louis Pasteur, not just in germs or vaccines, but in how we think, in how we teach, and in how we treat knowledge, not as a weapon, but as a gift. The story of science is not always a straight line. Even the brightest torch can be hidden or misused. There have been times when nations forgot Pasteur's words. Times when science was no longer shared but controlled. No longer used for healing, but for harm. In the early 20th century, governments realized the power of scientific discovery, and they began to guard it like a weapon. During World War II, the world raced to build the atomic bomb. It was science, brilliant, precise, and devastating, used to destroy cities. Behind closed doors, nations began to treat scientists like soldiers. Laboratories became fortresses. Data became secrets. And suddenly, science had a flag again. In the Soviet Union, a man named Trofim Lysenko rejected Western genetics. He claimed that plants could be trained to grow a certain way through ideology, ignoring real data and evidence. Stalin backed him. Scientists who disagreed were imprisoned or killed. The result? Crops failed. Millions starved. In the United States, the Tuskegee study withheld treatment from black men with syphilis, just to observe the disease's progression. Not only unethical, it was unscientific. Knowledge became a tool of control, not care. In Nazi Germany, science was twisted into eugenics, not shared but weaponized. These are the shadows in science's history. Not failures of discovery, but of philosophy. Because when science is claimed by one group, when it serves only the powerful, when data is censored, when labs are silenced, the torch dims. The Cold War escalated this fear. Nations raced to space, to arms, to artificial intelligence, each one guarding its findings, fearing the other's progress. Scientists became assets, defectors bargaining chips, and Pasteur's idea that science should belong to all seemed almost naive. But even in those moments, quiet rebellions burned. Scientists whispered across walls, they smuggled journals, they defected not for power, but for the chance to share. And time again, we learned the same lesson. When science is isolated, we all suffer. When the truth is hidden, diseases spread. When data is censored, the planet warms. When collaboration stops, progress stalls. In the modern age, we see this tension again. Climate change debates twisted by politics. Public health guidelines dismissed as opinion. Social media drowning facts in misinformation. The border around science may be invisible, but it is still fiercely contested. That's why Pasteur's words matter now more than ever. Science must remain a torch, not a sword, not a wall, not a brand, because truth, real truth, doesn't need a passport. And discovery, no matter where it begins, should never end in isolation. Science is not static. It's not a cold machine or a distant discipline. It is a living, breathing language, spoken not in words but in curiosity. And today, more than ever, that language is spoken by many voices. At the top of Earth's tallest mountains, climatologists drill into ice older than civilization. In deserts and jungles, biologists search for new species and new cures. Beneath oceans, robotic submarines chart lands no human has touched. And above us, telescopes gaze into galaxies so distant they defy comprehension. These are not acts of conquest, they are acts of connection. A Japanese astronomer identifies an asteroid. A Nigerian chemist builds a better water filter. An indigenous healer in the Amazon helps a pharmacologist isolate a new compound. This is science. Borderless, timeless, human. Today, international teams explore Mars together. They decode genomes in shared labs. They develop open-source medical tech. They publish in journals read in every language. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed many faults in our systems, but it also reminded us, collaboration saves lives. Data shared equals time saved is lives spared. And even in our most divided moments, the world's scientists came together, not under one flag, but under one purpose. The purpose Pasteur believed in. And now, new frontiers await. We're editing genes, printing organs, training AI to read blood tests and discover new molecules. We're learning that the human body is a universe, and the universe may be more alive than we ever imagined. But every discovery carries a question. Who will it serve? Will we build a future where knowledge is shared freely, or one where it is sold, hidden, or weaponized again? Pasteur left us more than theories. He left us a compass, a direction to follow when the world grows dark. Science knows no country because knowledge belongs to humanity. When we believe this, deeply collectively, we can solve any problem. Climate change, hunger, disease, even loneliness, isolation, and injustice. Because science at its best is not just the study of the world, it is the act of caring for it. And when one scientist discovers something new, that light doesn't belong to them alone. It belongs to all of us. In every classroom, every clinic, every quiet little lab, the torch still burns, and as long as it does, there is hope. Not just for nations, but for humankind. Louis Pasteur could not have imagined satellites, space stations, gene therapy, or quantum computing. But he knew something far more important. That the light of knowledge cannot be owned, it must be shared. And that light, passed from hand to hand, mind to mind, generation to generation, is what will guide us through the challenges ahead. Pasteur's words are not just history. They are a map, a reminder, a promise. Science knows no country, because the questions we ask, the wonders we chase, the lives we try to save, they all belong to everyone. So let us keep asking. Let us keep sharing. Let us keep lighting the world.